Welcome very, very much to Conversation. A pleasure to welcome to the program Tom Kiely. We're going to reminisce some over a long exposure we've had to media developments and intellectual developments in the world society, particularly here in New York City. And we're going to be talking about that within a context of it's October 14, 2014. Tom, so good to see you again, and welcome to the program.
Thank you very much, Harold. This is a New York institution. I'm very happy to be here on your show.
Well, I'm happy to be here with you. And do you mind, you can indulge me, I'm going to take a little second to give a tip of my hat, because you'll see on my neck has a wound on it, or it's a bandage. And I would like to, at this moment, if you don't mind, looking for something positive, to say that I've just come out recently from surgery, and I would like to sing the praises of who were involved in that, included the Veterans Administration and New York University medical people at all levels, neuro surgeons, cardiac, vascular surgeons at all levels, did a magnificent job in identifying that my right cardiac artery that serves the brain in an independent way with oxygen had been blocked seriously to where I was in the threat of having a massive stroke in the brain, which could render one to be a vegetable. And they magnificently did the work and did a procedure only about 4 days ago that were here in the meetup, and that they addressed the problem, and that they have given me 20 years of projected capability to avoid a strike that if they had not been able to do it, they made magnificent. It was all done very magnificently. It involved cooperation on their parts among many specialists and so forth, and that they came out that it was a total success, and that I would like to give a tip of a hat to a successful procedure achieved by a great number of people within the medical profession, and that it's a positive story that we are making some progress in many fields in terms of the human condition, and a tip of the hat to the people that helped put me in this chair on this particular date, so you don't mind. Okay?
Not only that,
and don't be taken up by the fact that the wound is healing, and this will be away in a day or two, but anyway, yeah.
Well, certainly it's something to celebrate for many reasons, and not the least of which is your good health is important to a lot of people, I'm sure, who are watching. But the other thing, Harold, thank you very much for explaining all that, because I was about to say what we say in Brooklyn. I'd hate to see what happened to the other guy, when I saw that.
Oh, no. Well, but it was good. And so I'm happy to be here, and also to have that clean bill of health, and I can already begin to feel positive effects from that. And I did want to go off on that. But listen, Tom, let's talk. We're talking now about the human condition and technology, and particularly communication. And you were a co-founder, along with
Lenny Charles.
Lenny Charles. I love Lenny Charles. I had a nice talk with him recently. In fact, from my hospital bed, we had a talk with him and you. And let's go back to that, and then, or let's go back even a little bit before, because he had the theater building downtown, a major factor, major force, and so forth. And you've been involved in, it was called the INN World Report. You were a co-founder and supporter of him in that. But then, why don't you go back a little bit before that, even earlier in your life experience, to when you ran into Lenny and got involved in communication, born and raised, a little bit educated, and then let's talk about the human condition and where we stand and what the positive factors we might be able to identify might be.
Well, I've always been interested in the human condition, my own and everybody else's, and I've always been interested in, doing what I could to help try to improve it. And as such, in various points in my life, I've been what you might call an activist, working in on different topics. I was going to be drafted during the Vietnam War. I ended up serving in West Berlin, Germany. I avoided Vietnam very deliberately,
Yeah, absolutely. It was horrible.
But I did my time, and of course Berlin and the West Berlin with the Berlin Wall up in those days in the early 70s, late 60s was a hotbed, and a lot of intellectual activity there. And I met a lot of Germans and had a lot of great even political discussions, which many of them became quite prophetic, I would say.
Were you an officer or enlisted?
Oh, no, I was an enlisted man.
Okay, okay.
Absolutely. And then, when I got back, I got involved in a couple of things. But I kind of, I studied philosophy, actually.
Okay. Where did you study and so forth?
With a Tibetan monk, a great scholar who was actually in New Jersey.
Woodstock? Or
no,
not
there
was one up in Woodstock.
There is one up in Woodstock. There's one in Washington, New Jersey also. Robert Thurman works with that group.
Robert Thurman's major, yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But I learned philosophy, logic, metaphysics from this great teacher. And I made a living in software, applying that logic and so forth.
Oh, you were involved in the technological development of things,
yes.
Yeah. What about the family setting when you were young, 5, 10 years old and all of that? Was it encouraging? Was it
actually, it's
does it make a difference? I think it makes a difference.
It's fascinating, Harold, that you say that, because before we went on the show, went on the air, I should say, we were talking about that period of time. I come out of the early 50s.
Okay.
Okay. And I'm very fortunate in that my father, who had quit high school when he was 16 and then joined the military at 17, had to have his parents sign for him, served in the Second World War, came back, realized what he felt was the error of his ways, went back, got his high school degree, and then on the GI Bill.
Yeah, right. Yeah,
on the GI Bill, that terrible socialist program. Okay, he went to NYU at night for 9 years while working full-time and having his family. Anybody who could work full-time and go to school is amazing, I think, and have a family on top. And, he instilled in us a lot of virtues, working hard, actually ethics. But the point I'm trying to make is I realize it was not as widespread as we'd all wish, and that's our task to make it more widespread. But I literally surfed on the edge of the American dream, and the creation of the American middle class. I witnessed it.
And that you were born right in. I mean, that was the right time, because after the Second World War, it was just 60 years of almost magical growth in this country. I mean, it was growing. The middle class was growing in a new dimension.
And we thought it was perpetual. Well, we thought it was evolution, not aberration. There were things like World's Fairs back in those days to celebrate where we were going. We don't have World's Fairs anymore. Not in this country, practically.
I guess you're right. I hadn't thought. We try to have them for a particular
We were having them every 5 years or so. We haven't had one since, I think, the 90s or something like that.
Okay, that's interesting.
They're having them in other places. But it's interesting you bring this up, because what's happened to the middle class, and that's part of the reason why I'm in the alternative media. I have a model to explain it, which I've had economists on my program, politicians, that they all find it interesting, educators. In my opinion, and we were talking about oligarchy before. The American middle class was created to dissuade everyone from trying the Soviet model, trying the communist model.
Well, that was the big dialectic of the Cold War period.
And more importantly, before FDR's inauguration speech, we have nothing to fear but fear itself.
You do a pretty good Roosevelt.
Well, I should be so lucky. But a lot of people mistake that phrase for his Pearl Harbor speech. It's not true. He said it, to my understanding, at his inauguration. Why? Because there was a great fear in the country that we actually might go communist.
Well, there was that, and it was also facing a great and terrible gut-wrenching depression that had occurred. Don't forget. That was something that was gut-wrenching.
So to keep the people in line, the people were thrown a bone. And this device called the American middle class was inflated. Don't go communist. And then it particularly was useful after the Second World War.
Do you think there was a serious thought of the country going communist after that?
Sure.
There was a real serious threat of that.
Well, how do you call McCarthy?
McCarthy was a result of that fear so forth. And then George Kennan came along with the containment thinking in terms of the world view of things and so forth.
And think about it.
That was the major confrontation of the time out of the Second War.
This aligned the American public with the philosophy of going into Vietnam and putting a stop to this communist stuff all over the place. My father came out.
That was containment.
But they were literally where they had been protesting the status quo before World War II. They came out of World War II into the middle class, saluting, yes, sir. I get in great arguments. The generation gap, we used to call it. You know?
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah, right. Yeah, right.
Later on in his life, he came to realize he had been had. You know,
did you see the thing Ken Burns just recently put on?
Which one?
Major series. I mean, it's just this last month. A 7-part, 2-hour each segment about Teddy Roosevelt and then Franklin Roosevelt. Magnificent piece of educational video that was done just magnificently and so forth about the influence of those two major Roosevelts in terms of the American experience. It's a major film.
I haven't seen it, but I did read.
You saw the thing on the Civil War that he did.
A
major filmmaker.
If you find that interesting, I would suggest, if you haven't seen it already, the book called The Imperial Cruise.
I don't know that at all.
It's great. It's by the author of the book Flyboys, who's the author whose father was a pilot, I think, during the Second World War.
Yeah.
The Imperial Cruise was a cruise that that Teddy Roosevelt's Secretary of State, well, I think it was Taft even maybe, I'm not sure, the big guy, was sent on to go into Asia to take a look at our colony in the Philippines and to go make nice with the Japanese and the Koreans and nasty, nasty stuff. The Filipinos were considered to be Asian Negroes. And, you know, we stabbed them in the back. They thought we were coming in to help them in their revolution against the Spanish, which we did, but then we immediately took the place of the Spanish. And books like that suggest that Teddy Roosevelt encouraged the Japanese to play the empire game, to get into it, and you know, many people think he was therefore responsible for World War II in the Pacific.
Well, that would be one way of reading things. Some people could do that. I like a line. I'm not sure if it's Shakespeare. I think it is. Who had Daedalus or maybe it was James Joy. I don't know. History is a nightmare. Looking back, history is a nightmare of inadequacy in terms of what's emerging from which we're attempting to awaken. And I think there's a great sense of perhaps we're at a time, I suggest to you off camera before we started, that this is not your normal time. This is not your normal time like the French Revolution or...
I don't think the French Revolution was a normal time in its day.
No, but that was a historical shift that was going on, getting away from the feudal system, or even the United States of America, setting up a system over here against the feudal order that had held for 1,000 years after Rome. It had always been realpolitik. Whoever had the army could insert themselves as legitimate, have PR and that sort of thing.
I think it got much more subtle. I think it's subtle, just as rough, and millions of people are still dying. I think it's just it's not such a direct connection. But if I may comment on what you said,
it's also a harbinger of change, and particularly at the level of capability, as the technology began to move almost exponential in its expression.
Well,
in the modern experience,
when you mention history, and that history is a blah blah blah.
A lot of it,
Sure, but I like what the lesbians say.
What do the lesbians say?
History is his story, okay? And the his is the guy who won, okay? The guy with the big club. So it's not necessarily, what happened. It's what the guy who won wants you to believe happened, and a lot of that has to do with making sure he can win again in the future. So because you're unarmed with the truth.
Yeah. That's what I'm trying to say. But it's not as though it's some. It will be tried to be shored up with creation stories about the Lord God created us to rule the world and all these kind of things, which has been characteristic of societies 1,000 years of Rome. They didn't pay much attention to Jesus or any of the people who were talking about take the least among us.
I think with Constantine, Jesus became useful.
300, well, anyway, all of that we understand. But so that sort of thing is going on, and then you got you seem to autodidactically, as they say, educated yourself as you're going along, and because you've always been, on the cutting, you've always been intellectually curious and so forth.
Absolutely.
Yeah, okay, good. Now maybe we could roll along. You're into New York, and then when did you pick up, if I could, you were the co-founder of the INN World Report with Lenny Charles.
Right.
And Lenny Charles and I go way back, and maybe you could recount how you got together, and we could talk some about communication, in terms of intellectual communication, of understanding the world and the universe.
I can tell you exactly how it happened.
Okay, please do.
The theft of the 2000 election, and there's no question that it was that way. It says so in the New York Times. If you look at the November 2001 issue, in one of their issues in the back pages, they paid to recount all the votes, and They didn't know how to tell us because it was after September 11th, 2001. But in fact, if the votes in Florida had been counted as per the law in Florida, Gore would have been the president. But the attempt at denying us our right to see fairly what happened in that election really outraged me. And I had a curious feeling.
The attitude of the Supreme Court, you mean?
Well, the Supreme Court hadn't acted yet when we got involved. This was the first, in my opinion, real wave of activism post email and that sort of thing, and
right
internet.
At the turn of the century.
Yes,
right,
and so groups were popping up all over the country, right, left, and center.
Yeah, right.
Okay,
pitchforks in the air, perhaps,
or quite possibly.
In the minds of many.
Well, well, I shouldn't say we, but Antonin Scalia was being dogged all around the country wherever he spoke, and people were chanting, and it apparently got on his nerves. So I had, as a historically interested person yourself, you may find it interesting to know that I had a similar feeling to the one I had when President Kennedy was murdered.
Oh, yeah.
When that election was stolen.
63.
I hadn't felt the same way, denied, like I had since then. So
you felt denied.
I felt denied.
Yeah.
That just like the people were denied their choice for president when Kennedy was killed, I felt like there was an attempt to deny the people their choice for president in 2000. That's just the way I felt.
And you were outraged? Is that too strong a term, maybe?
I was outraged. I was outraged.
And motivated by that.
And motivated, and that's how I met Lenny, because I got involved with a voter rights group that sprung up, and the person who founded that group, another New Yorker, knew Lenny, and he put the two of us together. And Lenny had this television studio, and Lenny had a dream of making media.
Right. He also had a hugely massive building down right in the middle of Wall Street.
Well, Tribeca, they were renting the building at the time. They later went on to purchase it.
Yeah, right. Yeah. It was a major thing. He set up a major production facility and so
on.
And he was working in the vineyards of an alternative view. Like you wanted to have an expression that met your need to have an alternative understanding of that was being foisted upon you or forced upon you. And he was involved with that.
Because the corporate media were cheerleading.
Yeah.
Like they so often do. Like they cheerleaded the non-existent weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, where at least 1 million or so Iraqis perished.
Wasn't that an amazing con job? I mean, do you feel like you're submitted to a con job by a particular interest?
Well, you know what happened? I met Lenny. I have a nickname for him. He was kind of like John the Baptist. He had this vision.
John the Baptist.
He had this vision. He looked crazy at everybody.
He
had this vision about doing a television show that talked about things truthfully. And I heard him, and I said, the guy's making sense. And
he had a lot of technological smarts about him.
Oh yes.
And
a lot of very resourceful. And but, what we together came up with was, we could form a protest group, we could take a march on Washington, we could do this or that. But if the tree is going to fall in the forest and nobody could hear it, what good is it?
The media's got to be addressed.
Let's make our own media.
Right.
Let's be that microphone and that camera in the forest that the corporate media won't touch.
Okay, that's interesting, because that's when Amy was just going out of the fire before the.
That's right.
And he knew, and he was doing major work in trying to get her efforts done and out into the technological real world of transponders.
He was helping the early Democracy Now! Program get out to be broadcast via satellite across the country.
And that's where it's at, in a certain sense, in terms of reaching numbers and having an effect that could be really something other than an annoyance to the people who run the major media outlets and so forth, and are answerable to the normal political process.
Well, I think there's a cumulative effect. I refer to Amy, because she came out of Pacifica.
Yeah, definitely. Pacific, I'm afraid, might be under trouble now. I'm not sure.
Well,
economically,
I think so, and that's a whole story in and of itself.
Joe Hill,
But I call that alternative media 1.0, and what Lenny and I were doing with INN, I call alternative media 2.0.
Okay.
And the reason is that we analyzed and we asked who do we think we are to come along when you have luminaries like Amy Goodman doing this already for a long time. Why do we feel we can make a difference? And we took stock and we determined that the problem with alternative media as it had existed till that point, was that it was partisan. It was a partisan effort. It was preaching to the converted. It was talking to your group, whether it was right or left.
Yeah, right.
And we felt that obviously this has only gotten us into trouble.
Passions are motivated, or passions are invigorating of attitudes to get involved when one is passionate, engaged in a sense of a violated or an important to be preserved truth that is being ignored. That's what that motivates a great deal of passion in the universe, it seems to me.
I could take that one step further.
Do it by all means.
A personal, not only observation, but experience of mine, to the very point you're making.
By all means.
The truth
That's a biggie.
That's a biggie. It's a biggie, and it's a nothing, and it's everything at the same time, right? So, but it's not usually something that you can tangible,
on the
right?
table,
but we all know what it's like. It's like I know it when I see it, like pornography, right?
Yeah.
Okay. When the truth is being violated, because it's not something it's not like your mother being attacked, okay, and raped, okay. Yet it's as bad or could be worse, depending on the circumstances. Millions of people could die as a result of the truth being attacked the right way.
The truth. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll finish up by saying, in my life, I have found that when you step up to the plate and defend the truth.
Okay. Go
on. When you
go
step up to the plate and defend the truth when no one else is doing it, particularly, or when you could not do that and there would be no consequence directly to you. Actually, in my experience, in my belief, the universe smiles on that. Okay. And you can find
there
that
could be a psychology wrapped up in
well,
that too,
I think that the very act of doing that accrues to people in one way or another.
And that has something to do with people by which people get a sense of identity, which is really important psychologically, don't you think? Can get.
It could identity, but it could be a very lonely place when you're the only person standing up for the truth as well.
Well, it is the largest one you're thinking. Everybody else is saying, get down, sit down.
It doesn't have to be you're ruling your thing. It could be something as simple as, if you see somebody being abused by authority and you step in and you're willing to go to court or something. I mean, whatever. But I found in my life that I've had amazing experiences. I've had several opportunities in my life to do that. I've done it, and I wouldn't exchange it for a thing. I mean, let me put it to you like this, Harold.
Yeah.
How many people do you know that had their own nationally, nightly broadcast news television program?
I don't think there are that many. Nightly news program?
National.
National, okay.
Nightly news television broadcast. How many people do you know who set that up and did it?
Well, I don't think it was possible to be done by anything but very large corporations that had control of all the transponders and the things that made it possible to have a network connected, like that.
You know at least two people, Lenny and myself.
Okay. I had thought about Brian Lamb, or I thought about Ted Turner and some of the other pioneers of cable television.
If you know them,
cable television, we're in cable television.
I mean, if you know them personally, how many people do you know personally who've done that? The point I'm trying to make is, as we're living in interesting times.
Yeah, we sure are.
This is a confluence. Of course, the technology allowed us to make our show, and
exactly.
For those of you who might be confused, I think INN World Report is a television program.
Yeah, that you guys put together.
That Lenny Charles and myself put together. We have another friend who contributed, but off camera, off everything. And we were on the Dish Network satellite system for about 7 years.
Yeah, that's right.
And for the majority of that time, we were a nightly news broadcast, half-hour show.
That's right.
It was a weekly magazine before that. And on a shoestring budget. But because of the technological advances, we were able to do that. And many, many great voices were given air.
Maybe if you share what the reality is for people who are interested in trying to communicate or have a voice like that. We're now coming into a multimedia world. We came out of radio, and we had radio.
And print.
And print particularly. Print goes back Gutenberg, and Gutenberg, the Gutenberg galaxy of Marshall McLuhan's, which is an absolutely brilliant thing of understanding the implications of media on human consciousness and so forth. And
by the way, Harold, I see very similar things happening in response to our technological breakthrough as happened in response to Gutenberg, namely censorship, okay, the attempts at how do you manage this thing, burning books and that sort of thing. And you can see that the powers that be they're a little bit uncomfortable with all of this freewheeling stuff, and there are different the bills in Congress to fight homegrown terrorism on the internet, for instance, and things like that. And some very innocuous groups were included in that. But anyhow.
But it had all built out with radio, and I can remember when there was no television. You're too young that, I suppose, television was
early
always
days
there.
of television. I watched the New York Yankees on a pie plate of a screen
There you
about
go.
that big. Back
Well,
when
I'm going to share something I've shared on this audience. I'm out of Detroit, Michigan, middle class. My dad was a lawyer. Dennis lived next door. In 1946, I was 10. I was 9 years old, and they got a new car off in 1946. Everything had been bombs for the Second World War effort and everything, and they got that. And then they also got a television set in Detroit, and they put this television set in the corner, and there was literally in Detroit then literally no television programming at all. There was a test pattern. We used to look at the test pattern, and then finally came Kukla, Fran, and Ollie. And so the thing is, there was a time before television, and these create different sensory ratios and senses of consciousness, the media by which one communicates and so forth, as Mr. McLuhan spelled out with great accuracy and understanding and so forth. So that was all coming. And then there came along about 1970, it really started getting institutionalized, but somebody had to invent videotape to get the industry going. There was no videotape. It was all kinescope in terms of the archiving of everything like that. And they got video, Mr. Peter Gomark Sr. invented it. And Japan started producing it. And then you got where you could do production, and they were off to the races with the whole new medium of television, which took to Hollywood in order to make the entertainment part of that thing available to them. And Joe
Unfortunately,
Franklin,
I think it's all entertainment now.
Yeah,
even the news.
that's entertainment.
Infotainment.
Yeah, infotainment. But anyway, that all got started, and then cable came along, and cable was heralded by a study called the Sloan Commission report, intellectuals and academics, and so understanding the implications. They said they call it cable television, the medium of a word that's really interestingly being discussed in this particular moment in history, of abundance, as opposed to scarcity.
Can I comment on that?
By all means.
What you're describing are various technological delivery systems, right? And then abundance is the abundance of the ability to deliver.
Right.
And now we see it, quantumly, exponentially with the internet and with smartphones and all of this stuff.
I know, it's staggering.
However,
Yes.
don't be fooled by the plethora of delivery systems, okay? On my show, what I try to share with everyone.
Now you're talking about your show now, currently.
My radio show.
Yeah. But we were talking about INN. And
it's still called INN. We're not on TV anymore, but I carry the flag on a radio show 2 nights a week.
Okay, well that's a different medium, radio.
Right.
Yeah, and it's a different sensibility you're addressing with radio.
It is, but it's still the ability to talk about what's happening. I have the same guests on, whether it's just not on video.
Yeah, but it is a different proposition if you're hearing something. Remember the thing about the people who saw the Kennedy-Nixon debate? And everybody who saw it on television said Kennedy wanted to walk?
Right.
And that's the way in which human communication is taking place. It's a multimedia world that we're coming into. Now, I would submit.
Look,
that's the future.
It's all different. It's incumbent on a radio person to be even more engaging and more interesting.
It's what McLuhan would have called a hot medium. It brings one sensory in high definition.
I love communication.
I know, I can see you're very good at it.
I have a passion for it.
Yeah.
And I'll take the radio. It took me a while to learn that. It was ugly at first, but what I was trying to say is...
We're getting ahead of the story a little bit anyway.
But this is a very important point because it'll get us right back into the story, I feel. Yes, there is a plethora now of unimaginable delivery systems through the air, even not even the cables anymore, that we couldn't even envision just a few years ago.
That's right.
And I caution my listeners, it's my opinion, that don't be fooled. I see people, got their heads in their device all day long.
I know.
And you can have a brand new shiny delivery system, a pipeline made of solid gold, okay? But if it's effluence that's flowing through it, it is still a sewer. It's a fancy sewer. It's nothing more than a fancy sewer. So yes, all the possibility to deliver information is great. What about the quality of the information?
Well, that's
Has that
a question
changed?
that has to be dealt with and everything. And what's the influence, or what is the medium is the message. Mr. McClure used to say, you know, the medium is the way it is being communicated is what's changing, and it changes human sensibilities and so forth, and it has huge implications in terms of sociological, political, and economic organization.
I don't see any great.
You don't see. Okay.
I don't see any great change in the knowledge of people. In fact, it's worse. Okay, the fact that that we could have gotten, the country, not all of us, INN, okay, here's a good, why
INN,
we did this.
Back to Lenny and you.
International News Net
Right.
World Report, okay? Little old INN
Yeah.
on a negative budget.
Yeah.
We had to put money in out of our pocket.
Yeah, I wanted to talk about some of the nuts and bolts of what you did.
I can, but
and how do we get the distribution
this is the why of what we did, okay?
Good. Okay.
On our little show, we got it right in 2003, before the invasion of Iraq. Our listeners, our viewers were told, our viewers were told there will be no weapons of mass destruction found in Iraq. It's a lie, okay? And the person who told our viewers that was Scott Ritter.
Okay, Scott Ritter, yeah, I remember Scott
The
Ritter.
UNSCOM inspector who was no fan of Saddam Hussein's.
Right, no, I understand.
And who was the darling of cable television during after the first Gulf War.
Right, yeah,
But
that was
when
a
he
horror.
he was in charge largely of eliminating the weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. He did that, and in the run up to the second Iraq war, he couldn't get on TV to say that.
Yeah. You're right.
But he got on INN to say it.
Yeah.
Now, how could we, with no money, get that right when you've got ABC, CBS, Fox, and all the rest, who were, not only did they get it wrong, but they were cheerleading toward the death, the unnecessary death of...
Well, maybe if you get enough abundance to have it, you can have it off on something that's so irrelevant as a radio show off to the side. They can have anything go, you know. And rather, when the leading edge of the society is being led by the established media, and they have their own thing, so they can let there be different voices because they aren't going to be effective.
But that's fine.
You know, it's a lost leader.
I'm asking you, the quality of all of that infrastructure that we just talked about before, what good is it if it's not because the knowledge wasn't there? It was there. What was it that through all those golden pipes of all those media, it was death and poison pouring through it rather than the truth?
Well, it was the emergence of a neocon thing, wasn't it? I mean, it was the emergence of Wolfowitz and all those people were coming. It was a political thing behind it.
I think
Mr. Reagan got invented, and then you got Mr. Bush involved.
I think it goes way back.
And ultimately it will be economics, because politics and economics are joined at the hip.
And who owns the media? I mean, you know, General Electric is a defense contractor. Are they going to, do they have a fiduciary responsibility to promote a war? I mean, it's an interesting question.
That's what got us out of the Depression, really. The Great Depression of the 1930s was going to war.
Well, that's an interesting question.
Well, it is true.
I understand,
I think
but
it's understood.
if we were flat on our back, where did all the money come from? What if we, instead of making B-24 Liberator bombers from Ford factories, instead if we made everybody a car and we made trucks and we made, I mean...
Wasn't able to be done, apparently. It took the war in order to get the thing moving.
It was done overnight.
Yeah, right.
World War II, we were in and out of World War II, the fighting in about 3.5 years. Okay, Iraq went on for 10 years, whatever. This country, as you point out, was flat on its back.
Yeah.
And it produced, you know, tens of thousands of brand new shiny equipment that it just drew on the drawing board and flew some of the best airplanes in the world. How can you go from, if there was no money, if there was no will, if there was no brains, how did that happen? Where did the money come from? Well, the money was there, but we aren't going to use it unless it's to kill people? I mean, come on.
Well,
why couldn't we have done the same thing, same amount of money,
to help the people?
to do infrastructure.
Well, why weren't we able to? Well, I mean, that's the question. Why is it that war is a leading indicator of economic growth?
Because
war is a great thing to stir the economy.
Well, you know why?
You know,
because
things,
what is war? You know, Hermann Goering, right, in Nuremberg said, it's not the little guy. The little guy does what he's told, all right? He said,
as always it has been.
Goering said, what's in it for the farmer when the best he can hope for is to come home in one piece?
Yeah, right.
Okay? Yeah. It's not the little guy, it's the leaders.
Right.
And if anybody doesn't like it, we'll paint them as being unpatriotic, and they'll be steamrolled. And he says this, and then his interviewer said, well, but we're a democracy. He said, it makes no difference. Democracy, Soviet, Nazi Germany, it's all the same. So the point I'm trying to make is, what is it then? War is, oligarchs gone wild. They're trying to knock each other off, and then when you've bet in the house, you bet the house. You get all the money, you put everything on. Then we're all in it together. By the way,
Yeah, right.
When it comes to education, healthcare, it's like, hey, I got mine, Jack.
Well, those are values and things like that take a political expression one way or another, and all that kind of thing. But essentially, it comes down to, I said, do you think it's true that politics and economic theorizing, even let's say, that informs and establishes a basis for political stances and so forth, are joined at the hip? Economic theorizing, then.
Well, that's a whole subject in and of itself.
Well, it is, but it's one that's important,
yeah.
I think, don't you? In terms of, you had a thing coming along, you had a big shift. You had Mr. Keynes, right? He set up Bretton Woods, everything after the Depression and into the Second World War, and into after Roosevelt. Now he set up all the institutions that were set up: International Monetary Fund. You had the Federal Reserve Board set up in 1913, all that kind of stuff. But you had all that, and Mr. Nixon and Mr. Van Hayek, was it out of Chicago? They said we're all Keynesians now. The whole institutional structure was Keynesian, and you had a Keynesian notion. Everybody's agreed that Keynesians got the picture and everything like that. And then along came some revolution where you had the neocons. The neocons came, Mr. Wolfowitz.
Well, they're from where? They're from.
Well, I can remember.
They're from the communists, actually.
When I got started, well, they were defected, yeah. But anyway, I can remember going to Washington when first the Portapac came out. Do you remember Portapac? Did you and Lenny ever work with a Portapac, or was that before your time? You were advanced beyond. That was the little device that came where an individual could make television. You had a little thing you could put on
I
your
saw
hip.
them. I remember. But you know what? You're going so fast, Harold, as you typically do. You're talking about economics and so forth, and this type of economics, that theorizing and whatnot.
Well, I think there's something to it. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, okay, yeah. What is there to it? If we look at what's happening today, we see an incredible redistribution of wealth.
Up.
We're not allowed to talk about it when it's from up down. It's the worst thing since, it's like you might as well try to kill Miss America or something.
Yeah, right.
But when it goes from down up, it's capital. It's, hey, nothing you can do about it. And so even though we're in these horrible economic times, somehow, as 99%, as they typically say, have been suffering. It's gone away from it. It's going.
You're talking now current. You're talking current now.
Yes.
Okay, that's good.
So theorizing, whatever you want to call it.
We're talking back to 80.
With or without theorizing.
Yeah.
Well, I think that it typically goes that way. I think the middle class, as I said earlier, was created to keep the group loyal and not trying the Soviet system, and then to use them to fight what we were sold to be.
Okay, that's good. That gets to economics, doesn't it? It gets over to Karl Marx, and it gets over to a labor theory of value, which informs it, or surplus labor theory of value, that all value is created through human labor, which gives an identity to the human purpose in the world and so forth, and gives an underpinning to how value is created in terms of the economic order.
Trouble
now
is,
you got a thing where the technology is taking over the production process in the modern experience.
But
now,
even before that, you had the Reagan Revolution, where they came to town and said, hey, wait a minute, this middle class thing has gotten too big. There's not enough left for the people at the top. They have no incentive anymore to make new things and new factories and all. We need to reverse this flow. We need to get them more money, which means we'll have to do with less.
Well, they had to have investment to make investments in goods and services that are going to pay for themselves.
And it was going to be trickled down, right? And it was going to be great because it was going to be trickled down when we change the tax code, when we give more money back to those folks at the top that know what they're doing, know what to do with it.
Well, there had been a revolution in thinking then at that time.
But what was the result?
It was coming out of Chicago, wasn't it?
Yes.
There was all the neocons.
Exactly. But what was the result? They did exactly what they said.
Yeah.
They built new factories. They made lots of jobs.
Yeah, they got a lot of profit at the top.
All that stuff. Where did they build the factories? In China.
Well, okay, yeah.
They didn't do it here.
No. But it was an economic theory where it was talking, and then it posits two things you could do in the economic order. You know, you can have, when we came out of the cave, what was that, 200,000 years ago they're telling us that we emerged out of Homo erectus in Africa and everything. All the resources, natural resources were here. All the oil was here, all the grass, everything was here, and we had a liaison with technological extension of utilizing the environmental order that existed, okay, and that we were embedded in, like the creatures. And then one of the things that happened after getting agriculture, Neolithic, you know, you had some control over the environment, and then they built civilization, city-dwelling people, because they had surplus and made it possible.
Well, you know, you spoke earlier.
Empires. And,
well, you spoke earlier. Carol Quigley. Have you ever read Carol Quigley?
Help me.
Carol Quigley, actually Bill Clinton credits Quigley as being one of the most influential professors he ever had at Georgetown.
Interesting, really.
Oh yes, you must read Quigley. The libertarians.
Yeah, okay, that
will tell you to do that.
Libertarian bent is something to be concerned
They'll
with.
tell you, and you know what? We've had the courage at INN to look at that.
Okay, good.
And to exchange
with
them.
That, yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah.
And they've taught me a lot. I'm a New York progressive liberal, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
But my brethren are so stupid when it comes to money. Okay, you talk about economics.
Yeah.
Money, economics is money. Okay.
Yeah. Well,
and the creation of money and so forth. The libertarians know all about that, and they talk about oligarchy. Okay, and they study oligarchy.
Right.
And Quigley, who was a historian for the CFR, Council on Foreign Relations.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's part of
He was, and he broke ranks. He spilled the beans, and he wrote a book called Tragedy and Hope, and I think they tried to prevent it from being published.
I think I know that, but it's just slipped my consciousness.
Tragedy and Hope, and he lays out how this is an intergenerational thing. Okay, this is nothing. We all think it's all accidental that the economy stinks, and some people make out like bandits at the top. You know, oh well, no. It's not accidental. It's not haphazard. But on civilization, back to what you were saying before, he wrote a book about civilization. He examines Western civilizations.
Okay, yeah, a lot of it comes through that prism.
And to your point before about, you know, you coming out of the caves and then you start to do agriculture. He
190,000 years of wandering around.
Well, in the Fertile Crescent there, what happened was, you know, agriculture is very sensitive to nature, right? To, you know, light, water, you know, temperature, soil, right? And
but it was the result of human intervention in the order that was existent that we had wandered around in for 190,000 years.
Right, but I'm trying to, at least from Quigley's point of view, and I agree with him, you know, how you go from there to your civilization and your creation myths and so forth.
Well, we've had 10,000 years to build that up.
What Quigley said was, you know, you had people who observed nature and could tell planters about, you know, when the best time to plant was, when the water was going to come in. And they did this by studying astronomy. By
living and experience.
And what happened was this became a priestly class in Samaria, places like that. And you had a transformation from a female sort of earth-based system to a sky male-based system, and then these people
Western Eastern that could be thought of.
And they could also by their studies they could anticipate certain astronomical phenomena, which then they could then seem like they were in tune with the gods or something. And
PR.
Yeah. So this was, in Quigley's opinion, this is how you get this sort of, you begin to get this ruling class and this priest class and so forth.
Yeah, I think it came with civilization. I think it, you know, because you had the surplus capability to have concern with something other than trying to find a piece of carrion to eat to keep yourself alive. which was the lot of us for 190,000 years
Right.
of our existence. That's a sort of particularly drab view of world history.
And then from the east, you got these horse riders who come sweeping in, and they take it.
Yeah, that whole nother thing.
Yeah.
But anyway, back again to the technology. So it's technology, and that's an extension. And then you can come out, and then you get a couple. Let's say in a certain primitive or simple sense, you got a couple of things going on in terms of production. You have for organization of society. You have a private sector, or you have capital assets. Let's just say ownership of a piece of private property or a public private sector that somebody can own and maintain. Then you have a government sector, which they can tax and spend and regulate the order, in which is done in the name of certain principles and so forth. Those two principles still hold, and it seems to me that thing coming out of Chicago was one that was singing not the praises of Mr. Keynes and so forth, of dealing with the situation that Mr. Roosevelt, the latter, had and so forth, but it was dealing with an idea that you've got to have some vigor, or even Schumpeter seriously critiquing Keynes and so forth, but that they had a different view in terms of a way to form capital and what are the important things, and the importance of the private sector and private property and private ownership and some of these right wing, if that's the right term, which became Republican values, and that still holds.
I don't know if they became Republican values so much as the values were there, and the people who held those values selected the Republican Party to be their front.
Right, and then they got elected on the basis of that. It rang a bell.
And their capital helped to get elected too.
Well, that's right. And then that question is, and then it was in the left, let's say, the left was all tied up with the thinking of Karl Marx, as you said, communism, that kind of thing. And that the idea is that the institution of private property or private ownership, let's say, if you own a capital asset that's going to pay for itself, you can make an investment that's going to pay for itself in 5 to 7 years out into the future, you can tap into the future expansion capability of the economic order. You can tap into the future profits and earnings of the investment. Whereas
you can do that with simple interest too, can't you?
Well, okay, perhaps so. Yeah, perhaps so.
Which is, a very interesting question. We talked about economic money.
The left was very much enamored, particularly out of the Depression, with the idea of private property, and so there was no way for there to be, and the technology, which is embodied in instruments and so forth, which are owned in a private property economy by people, is limited to very few people, because very few people have any investment to make an investment that's going to pay for itself out of its future earnings, rather than depending on past savings. You had to have past savings in order to make that investment, and they couldn't do it. They have collateralization in terms of the world banking and so forth. So you had a system coming out of Chicago and so forth, and that made a big difference in terms of some of the things that we're developing in the modern experience, and we still don't deal with. And the left still seems to have this labor theory of value, or surplus labor theory, that all wealth is created by human labor.
Look, I think
that's a problem, or do you? Maybe you don't.
No, the bigger problem.
Okay, good. Bigger problem.
Much bigger problem.
Okay, good.
Before World War II, okay, before everybody made nice and peace and came together and were unified.
After World War II, they were all unified under our victory.
No, during World War II, as compared to immediately before World War II, when you had this dynamic between labor and, all bets were off. We had all right, we got together. I think people had a much greater sense of oligarchy before World War II. Okay, that concept was laundered out of people's thinking.
Spell it out.
Oh, sure. During World War II and subsequently, we talk about democracy now. Amy Goodman, how often does she bring up the O word?
Ownership?
No, oligarchy.
Oligarchy. Oh, I was thinking oligarchy.
How often does even certainly the commercial media is not going to bring it up because it's owned by the oligarchy. Okay, but what about the alternative media, who is supposed to be informing us about these things?
Alternative media primarily is what you would call progressive and left, don't you think?
progressive and left
And
used
they
to
have
be engaged to help people survive against the oligarchy.
Survive,
in my
perhaps
opinion.
prosper.
That's
and,
right.
And serve the
and it
interests
doesn't
of the
do that
least
anymore.
among
It doesn't do that anymore.
I think Jesus would have been a progressive in his time, and they put him up on the cross.
You know,
right?
there's a very interesting former Israeli. He quit the country, but he talks about these very humanistic Jews through history. Jesus, Spinoza,
right,
and Marx. You know?
Right.
And that there's not that many of them, but these people are luminaries. But in any case, the left hasn't done a thing to defend people anymore against the oligarchy. In fact, it's worse. They've been bought off by the oligarchy.
Well, the one thing,
Please.
in part because they do not want, and they collectivized everything in this. They thought that the evil institution the evil institution, that the source of production is labor. People working.
And there's no production here anymore.
Well,
so
now,
then
but what's happening in the modern experience now is that this tendency to extend consciousness into productive elements, call them assets, call them investment opportunities, anything like that, is being done by a process that is irrevocably moving and infecting all of communication and so forth, like you and Lenny were doing and that sort of thing with INN and everything. Is moving, and it's now being transmogrified, if that's the right term. Not only to information technologies, which underpinning everything, digital and communication, and everything, but also to robotics. And robotics are now
nanotechnology to actual printing physical objects and
3D
so forth.
printing.
Absolutely.
Yeah, right.
No, there's an Italian who's done it on a large scale. He builds stone houses with a printer. Have you seen that?
No, I haven't seen that.
I can get you his American representative to talk about it if you'd like.
No, but it's a major thing. But the production is being done not through human labor. When I was in Detroit, and we had Henry Ford used to tinker in our family garage. I understand in my grandfather's era or grandmother's era when he was about 8 or something. And when he started the Ford factory and all that and the assembly, they needed those people who were coming off the farm, which were there would be mechanization of agriculture. They came and they needed them to stand on the line and turn the nut. They had to turn the nut. They had to turn the nut. And they needed those people in order to get production. They don't need people now.
But what's the big surprise here? You know,
they have no alternative way of forming capital.
Hold on, wait a second. Okay. What's the big surprise here? We were talking about our mutual hero, Buckminster Fuller. He anticipated this, didn't he? Wasn't there people saying, what are we going to do with all the leisure time when we get the machines doing everything? What happened to that? Where's my flying car? Okay, what happened to my future that was so bright?
A lot of the things that are developing are being developed in a capitalist mode, and it's all about IPOs and things like that. And there is a very small group of people who have any ownership of the things that are actually producing the wealth. And the only way they can distribute demand or buying power, you got to have capability to produce. You got to have the ability of the people to have the income to clear the market of what can be produced, maybe an abundance of liberating capability that is coming exponentially over the transom. Every day comes revolutions. They just saved my life, a routine thing that couldn't have happened 20 years ago, that kind of thing. These things are happening, but we have a capability of liberating the human
Maybe
system.
they saved your life from illnesses that didn't exist 50 years ago before food got so strange. But
that's another twist.
There you go.
Yeah.
Okay, but who knows? I mean, you know, Benjamin Franklin; those guys lived a long time,
they
ate fresh food. But you know, you're assuming. Okay, what about people? What about the population? They don't need people to twist nuts anymore. They don't need people to grow their food anymore.
That's the way that the left thinks. They can be hoodwinked into saying
and
the only way to get demand into the hands of the people is for them to have a job on the estate where the assets that are producing the wealth is held by a tiny group. They're the ones who have the assets.
There's a problem with that.
And we don't want anything to do with that. Because that's filthy lucre. No. We don't want to have anything to do with it.
There's a big problem with that.
And they're celebrating and it should not be thrown out cavalierly because the system does work. people do get things done. They are being engaged, and it doesn't be, you don't throw it out cavalierly, but it's a systems problem that is confronting. Thomas Piketty's talking about that.
Yes,
okay?
ill-gotten wealth. I mean, he's talking about monetary policy and money and interest too.
Well, yeah.
And why should France be on the hook for this stuff? But look, yes, production, turning the nut, growing the food, and fighting in the wars.
Well, okay. Well,
you know,
they'll be forced to do it.
When you need that,
when you need that,
it's motherhood and apple pie and make kids, and we need. Now it's the reverse. All of this that you're talking about assumes that the people with the bucks want surplus want a big population. They don't. Okay, they want it to go away. They want it to go down. Okay, there's a lot of.
What does evolution want to have happen to the human society? We're in an evolutionary order, right? The universe is it's synergetic. Its behavior system's unpredicted by the sum of the parts. There's something resonating more than the context in which something is taking place. So what do we think is the mission of the evolutionary process in this year 2014 that is trying to tell us in terms that could inform political and economic policy making by our leadership, intellectual and political?
Well, I don't think you can separate, certainly when there's human beings involved, I don't think you can separate, where are things going simply because of evolution. I think it's the minds of the beings who are in these bodies that are evolving because they can have such an impact. And we see, for instance, maybe we talked about this before, Darwin had it wrong, didn't he? Okay, Darwin talks about stuff over long periods of time, ping-ponging and mutations favoring things. We're seeing instantaneous change overnight in the laboratory, gene splicing, all of this stuff. It is being driven by money, by lucre. Okay, it's certainly not being driven by, how can we help people and make them disease-proof? No,
well, it is working. It is working.
Well, first of all,
the system is working.
I don't see the Darwinian people having any explanation for this. This is intelligent design, by the way, on some level.
Intelligent design's another issue.
I understand, but even maybe the intelligence isn't so-called God, but it's people in the lab, and it's not haphazard. They're very specifically putting flounder genes with tomatoes to make the tomatoes withstand cold. Okay?
We only got a minute left.
Sure.
Okay, so are you optimistic, pessimistic? We have weapon systems that apparently, by modeling, could destroy our whole species for the first time since about 1970. We also have a capability to bring, have you read DeMonte's Abundance? And Kurzweil and that, we have an ability to provide to the human society and the ecology an overwhelming liberating capability that we need a system that allows us to do. Are you optimistic or pessimistic for the human prospect?
I'm very pessimistic if people like yourself don't persevere, trying to get information, discussion, education, because we can't rely on our traditional forms of that. If we can do that, if we can make it interesting, the truth is stranger than fiction.
Well, okay, and I say you and Lenny, you got started with that thing, and the work you're doing on the your radio program, you're doing that. You get that going, and that's where we need that discussion. Trying to do that over here too. Maybe you can come on over here and help us out, and maybe you can get involved over here.
I'd love to, and I'd like you to have you on my radio show as well.
Anytime.
Very
happy
good
to do it. We can stream on the internet now with Google, with Skype and so forth. Thank you for viewing. Your pleasure. Tom Kiely, a major pioneer in terms of intellectual developing, understanding what's going on in the universe, and again, a tip of the hat to
Lenny Charles.
Lenny Charles, God bless him, and his whole group. Right. So thank you for viewing, and we will be coming back tomorrow with programming along these general themes. Tom, thanks so much for such a very well-led life and for coming in and for sharing these thoughts with us now.
Well, it's more well-led now than ever, now that I've been on the Harold Channer Show.
Well, it's my pleasure indeed.